Well, I gotta be honest with you. I am exhausted. I am sure that you are as well. I realized yesterday at some point just how tired I was, thinking back that it was well before Irma came that we were already anxious about what to do about Sunday and what path Irma would take and how do we prepare. This is our first hurricane leading a church in the midst of a hurricane. They don't necessarily give you a fail-safe manual for that. We relied on the wisdom of a lot of people, but like you, we were tracking that storm, it seemed, hour after hour, day after day, and that wears you down more than you realize. I think I was exhausted, and we, even before we were worried about the power or where the storm was going to hit, we were having trouble sleeping at night. I was going to bed late and getting up early and just trying to make sure we were doing all we could. We realized we weren't quite prepared ourselves. Ruth kept handing me this hurricane preparedness list, and I kept setting it on the table, thinking I'd get back to it until she'd hand it to me again because I had left it there, and trying to get the church ready and ourselves ready, and then the storm itself and the immediate aftermath, and worrying about the church and getting up here. And, we told our volunteers not to come on Tuesday morning because we weren't going to try to offer everything. We just wanted to provide a hot meal. But I promise you, if we had asked and said we needed help, they all would have shown up. Many did anyway, just because they don't pay attention to us, I guess. I'm not really sure why. And to be able to open on Wednesday and to share a meal and to connect with people. And personally, Ruth was really struggling with her eye, which was very, very painful and still is very painful. And if you're trying to cope with all we're coping with, and it reminded her of those who had physical ailments or had special needs, how hard it would be for them in the storm, particularly needing to find shelter. And some of you may be in that boat or have family members in that boat and know that it's just extra, a burden to bear. And even when you're without power, or in Michael's case, if you're without Wi-Fi, which is worse, right, because you can't watch stuff, there's this sense that you're at least in it together, and it's a shared pain, and you quietly harbor resentment for those whose power never went out, John Few, and Jeff's power went out for almost an hour. It was really tough on their family. So we have fun making fun of those folks. And I know that there are many in the county. We got our power back last night after we found a utility guy to come flip the switch for us. But I got to tell you, we kept, I thought, a good attitude. We were checking on other people, and we were trying to be encouraging and upbeat, and we're all in this together, and it was great. But I realized how tired I was when we came home Friday from being at the church office. And we had met with the Hicken family, and we had spent some more time in there in the air conditioning. And we came home and pulled in our front circle drive, and the neighbor was in his picture window, house lit up, waving at us. And this is a guy we never see ever. He was ecstatic. And so we get out of the car, and we run into the house and flip the switch, and there's absolutely nothing. And then suddenly, we're not all in it together. And I realized how shallow that encouragement was within me at that moment as tears came to all of our eyes. And Ruth sent me to Publix to get several pints of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And I said, Ruth, there's no way we can store Ben & Jerry's ice cream in the house without power. And she said, exactly. And we felt sorry for ourselves as we finished that ice cream. And I tell you, I obsessively looked at the power outage map online. You have that with Ocala Utilities. And even as I sat there and looked at our lonely little square, no one else around us was out. But when I expanded to the whole county, it put me back in my place because there are huge chunks still in our county without power, some in this congregation still without power. And so even our being without air conditioning for a night, even with power, it seems little. So it was a good attitude adjustment. And I'm saying all this because I'm pretty sure a lot of you probably were right there with me at some point this week. And I think it was preparing for this and knowing that I needed to have something to say this morning to us from God's Word. It was helpful to regain some perspective and to regain some strength. And being here today from the 9 o'clock service up until now has really made a difference for me, even in the last few hours. I do want you to know that we have food in the Family Life Center. We opened up some buffet lines at 10 a.m. for folks who were there for the 9 a.m. service, and they're going to be open again from noon to 1 today. And so if you're looking for a meal and you're looking for a chance to just sit in some nice air conditioning and get some more support and encouragement, please just go straight down the courtyard and take a left and into our Family Life Center after this service and enjoy that food and that time of fellowship together. As we thought about what we did want to share today, because Ruth had been thinking before, she just can't look very long with that eye before it starts to hurt, and we wanted to be able to share something. And we're in the middle of this sermon series, believe it or not. If we remembered, 2 weeks ago I preached about almost or altogether Christian. And we shared how an almost Christian does all the things an altogether Christian will do. An almost Christian worships and prays and serves. The only difference is that an altogether Christian does that through the love of God in their hearts. That love is their animating force, the power of God that is working through us. But I also said at that time that being an altogether Christian is also a play on words, because we mean altogether Christian, altogether one word, which means that each of us individually are altogether Christian. That's what we strive to be, powered by God's love, that we are completely and totally Christian because God's love has transformed us. But as you notice in the sermon series title, it's also altogether Christian, 2 words. That as a community of faith, the very character of Ocala First United Methodist Church is that altogether we are Christian. And I was reminded of that as I thought about how we will respond to Hurricane Irma. That there was never perhaps a time, at least recently, when Ocala needed this congregation more to be altogether Christian. There's never been a better time for us to gather, and never been a better time for us to be all together as we walk from this place this morning to serve. But how do we do that? How do we become altogether Christian as a congregation? Well, when John Wesley was organizing the Methodist movement in England in the 18th century, and he would take all of those who were responding to his revivals and his field preaching and all of their ministries and outreach they were doing throughout those towns and cities, he would organize them into what essentially were small groups. And he created what he called the general rules. Retired Bishop Reuben Job, who passed away in the last year, but he wrote a tiny book 10 years ago called 3 Simple Rules. He reinterpreted them for the church today. But these 3 simple rules were what were to guide those people who were called Methodist back then. These small groups who were together for support and encouragement and accountability. And the first rule was very simple. First, do no harm. He made it simple on purpose. Do no harm is not complicated. Even a child can understand what it means. It's applicable to all people at every stage of life. Doing no harm, which is certainly important for us as we respond to Hurricane Irma. We've all heard the stories of people who donated winter coats after Katrina, as if you need a winter coat on the Gulf Coast in Louisiana. We like to give and we want to do something, but sometimes even our desire to do good, we end up doing harm because we're not really paying attention. Doing no harm requires a certain self-awareness. And I think doing no harm requires us to think about decisions that are before us each and every day. Before we speak, before we act, before we make any decision, we pause long enough to consider about whether what we are about to say or do might cause harm. And if the answer to the question, will this cause harm, happens to be yes, then you don't do that, or you don't say that. It's simple. Do not harm your body. Don't make decisions that do harm to your own body or to someone else's body. Do not do any harm with the way you make and earn a living. Do not harm with the way that you spend your money. Do not harm in your words that you say to somebody. Do not harm in your words that you say about somebody. Do no harm to your marriage or your spouse. Do no harm to your children. Do no harm to God's creation. And if you read a newspaper during the day, you realize that as simple as this is, it's also could revolutionize and transform a community. If we would just do no harm with what we do and with what we say, we'd go a long way to bringing God's light into this world in a new way, bringing healing instead of hurt, bringing wholeness instead of division, being more like Jesus instead of less like Jesus. And not only that, but bringing others closer to Jesus. The second rule, after do no harm, was simply to do good. To do good. It's no more complicated than doing no harm, but I think it requires more effort. Doing good takes more initiative. It's a proactive way of living. You don't sit and wait for an opportunity to do good to come along, but every day you are actively looking for a way that you can do good. Do good to whomever you can, as often as you can, whenever you can, however you can. Do good. And I think that's our message for today as we think about what's our next step now that we're putting ourselves back together after Hurricane Irma. Is that this rule that John Wesley hundreds of years ago meant to guide his Methodist small groups needs to guide our church and each of our lives. We need to do some good. Who is hungry? Let's do good and feed them. Who is thirsty? Let's do good and give them something to drink. Who is naked? Let's give them clothes. Who is a stranger? Let's welcome them. Who is sick? Let's do some good and take care of them. Who is lonely? Let's visit them. Let's do some good. The reason I changed the reading in Romans is because I wanted us to hear again those first verses about how we are all members of one another and that each of us have been given gifts, but those gifts are meant for the common good. That each of you have been given things that you can do that are good and that help others. We belong to one another and we need to do good to one another. If you have the gift of service, it's time to do good and to find a place to serve this week. If your gift is one of encouragement, there's plenty of need for that going around right now. Find a way that you can be encouraging. If you have the gift of generosity and you have the means, there is great need to give generously. If you have the gifts of organization and leadership, we need people to help us lead and organize our response. If you have the gifts of compassion, do good and to show mercy cheerfully. Whatever gifts you have, whatever it is you're able to do, that's what God's calling you to do. To step forth and to do good by any means that you can. Doing good is a way of life. And when it's done, again, from that love of God that is in our hearts and pours forth, I think that is the best way for us to be all together Christian. On the back of the narthex as you're leaving today, there is a stack of paper. On the top, I think it says, response to Hurricane Irma. And it's just a long list of supplies that are needed. They put the call out to all the churches in United Methodist churches in Florida, particularly in the areas that are less affected by it. We need all of these things. And a lot of them are the things that you're told to have in your hurricane storage closet, which I was hurriedly buying at the end of the week, thanks to Ruth's encouragement. We have a whole shelf now that's our hurricane shelf, some of which we will probably never be able to use because I don't like refried beans that much. But they're looking for those kinds of things. Imperishable foods, bottled water, baby supplies, things that we can get, things that we have, and we're simply collecting them here at the church all of this week. You can bring them to the church office. You can bring them back to worship with you on next Sunday. We have people already eager and willing to help us sort and collect and get them to the distribution points because people need help now. And as soon as we can get things there, we will get them there. We need to do some good, and I don't necessarily know what that means for each and every one of you. I know bringing some things for our collection is a good place to start. I know checking on your neighbors and the people who live around you, maybe that you don't even speak to that much, is another good start. I know praying for those who are still affected by the storm and who have critical needs is a good place to start. Paying attention to the other community organizations that are out around Ocala and Marion County offering relief, asking for volunteers or asking for donations, that's a good place to start. Wherever it is that you can find a place to know that God's call is for us to do some good. The intentions are nice. Probably all of us want to do something. But what I hope is that we will actually, and all together, do something. And so let us do some good. John Wesley's third rule was simply to stay in love with God. We'll talk about that more next week. But we do good. We're careful not to do harm because we have the love of Jesus in our hearts and because we want to let that love shine forth. And so let our words, our actions share and show that love of Jesus to this community and to those across Florida so that they will know that we are all together Christian.